Day after Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent rolled out Operation Economic Outcast, sending the message across the globe that anybody who does business with Iran will be repudiated by the United States, will face the prospect of being ejected from the dollar system, if you will. Day after that, he announced sanctions against a groups of Islamist and leftist terrorist groups. Palestine Action, which is a UK-based organization that is designated as a terrorist group by the British government. Mazar Badil operates as a Front for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, designated FTO, Foreign Terrorist Organization, as well as an Italy-based entity that supplies specialized digital architecture tools and services for Antifa cells and other violent leftist extremists, Islamist and secularized. But as it pertains to the leading state sponsor of terror in the world, the target of Operation Outcast, does America have, and the Trump administration, have a right and proper understanding of what motivates the regime such as it's constituted? And how should we interpret some of the public statements that we discussed a bit earlier this week from the Iranian president, Pezeshkian, from the leader of the parliament, Galibaf, suggesting that, the lack of economic vitality is a problem, and it's a problem for regime survival. Take that at face value and continue to press down, or is that a misdirection play? For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by Matthew Gould, who is a former British ambassador to Israel and former deputy ambassador to Iran. Matthew Gould, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
No problem. Good morning.
Morning. So you wrote a piece for the Washington Post about this, sort of understanding the mentality of the regime in Tehran from your first-person experience there. So what is it, if anything, do you think the Trump administration is missing here?
Well, I'm not sure how much they're missing, but I think it's worth just explaining the framework that I use to try and make sense of what the regime's doing. And I after living there and doing my best to try and understand the regime, came up with two basic bits of insight. The first is the single most important thing to understand about this regime, much more than their ideology, much more than anything they say, is they are focused almost uniquely on staying in power. This is a regime with an incredibly strong survival instinct, and the people at the top of it know that there are a very large number of Iranians who would love to see them go. And if they were swept away by a popular uprising, then you wouldn't want to be providing their life assurance. So number one, this is a regime absolutely focused on its own survival. But number two, and this is also important, is it's an incredibly complex, fractured, messy, backstabby regime in which everyone in the regime is always looking over their shoulder, worrying about their status, worrying about whether they're going to be denounced as disloyal or whatever it is. That tendency to sort of insecurity has been massively heightened by the fact that so many of the top leaders were taken out at the start of this conflict. And so what you've got at the moment is a regime very sort of distributed and messy of people who are really nervous about their own position, who are therefore trying to entrench their position and make themselves secure by showing how hardline they are. And so there is an internal driver towards being more hardline than you'd think they ought to be, given their rational interests.
But, it's interesting you say that. If the regime is so unstable, which, what I think is a fair characterization of something as fractured as you're describing it. It would seem to me that would provide opportunity for said popular uprising to take advantage of a divide and conquer strategy, since they're doing the divisions at the leadership level. So what's your insight into why? I mean, other than the regime's willingness to kill their way out of protests or grievances, why there's not a coalition that can rise up and take advantage of this instability?
Well, I mean, look, the thing you mentioned looms incredibly large. There were big popular uprisings at the start of the year, and the Iranian regime was beyond brutal in how it put them down. I mean, killed, mowed down in cold blood, thousands upon thousands of its own citizens, going into hospitals to take out people who'd been helping lead the protests. So you have a Iranian people who are profoundly, I think, at odds with their own leadership, but who are traumatized by the bloodshed inflicted on them by the regime. And frankly, lots of the people who might have led up any sort of popular uprising were killed at the start of the year. Mm-hmm. So I think on the one hand, you've got a populace who really don't like their government. On the other hand, you've got a regime which is fractured, which is insecure. But unfortunately, that doesn't make it unstable, because the regime still has an absolute monopoly on force. There haven't been defections in any serious numbers or at any serious level of the armed forces or even the IRGC. And even if they're very nervous of each other, they also know collectively their best interests, in fact, their only interests as a regime, lie in making sure that one way or another the regime survive. So unfortunately, though it would be wonderful to think that something will happen and this lot will be toppled and there'll be a sort of new democratic Iran, it's just really hard to see that happening.
So I mean, at the outset, I mentioned some of the comments this week from part of that leadership group, and I know everything has to be viewed with a jaundiced eye coming from the Galabafs and the Pereshkians of the world, but how do you interpret the impact that the blockade and now Operation Outcast is having in terms of regime viability against reports of long lines for fuel and runs on stores to stock up because goods aren't coming in? What it is question I've been asking sort of all week from people that are experts in the area is patience the order of the day? Would that be the wise choice for the Trump administration to let this continue to play out with the ramping up of sanctions?
I think I would say it's three things. It's patience, because if what you're trying to do is exert pressure through economic means, that does take time. Secondly, it's consistency. So it's matching what you say with what you do, not making threats that you don't follow through on, because the Iranian regime is extremely good at sniffing out any gap in execution between saying and doing. And once you start to make threats that aren't followed through, then they tend to just discount everything else you then say. And then the third thing is a willingness to be as tough as you need to be. So the steps taken this week have been important, but the real test, and there is only one real test here, is the US administration prepared to take action against one of the big Chinese banks, which will have a meaningful impact on China's ability to trade with Iran? Because until you do that, for as long as you're only looking at small entities, small refining companies, individual tankers, it's helpful, but it's marginal. If you actually want to affect Iran's economy in a thoroughgoing way, then there's no alternative but to take steps to break the trading link with China.
Is this an opportunity for Western Europe to amplify what the Trump administration is saying and maybe put some of the hard feelings about the military piece of this campaign behind behind us erstwhile allies here?
Yeah, look, we all have an interest in a stable region, in an Iran that doesn't develop nuclear weapons, in the free flow of international trade, and in the Iranian people not being brutalized by their own regime. I think there is room for a lot of common activity. In particular, I think there's a lot we can do in terms of clamping down on the money laundering networks, some of the smuggling routes, Iran's disinformation campaigns. I think we can undoubtedly achieve more if we coordinate on all that stuff. But I think it's also worth saying one other thing, to go back to the question that you've been asking all week. And I think it's important to say this, that the Iranian economy is seriously suffering. Inflation is incredibly high. Food inflation is even higher. Unemployment is going up. People are really suffering. And that will have an impact. But ultimately, this is not a regime that cares about the well-being of its people. It will only care when that pain gets to a level that its own survival is genuinely brought into question. The comments by Speaker Kalibaf or the president are important, but they're fairly marginal figures within the regime. They are at the much more moderate public-facing end of the regime. The center of gravity of the regime is with the Revolutionary Guards, who have a much harder line approach than they do.
Just on the, helping to interdict the money laundering per Operation Economic Outcast, is the newly minted Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, is he inclined to be more willing to engage in collaboration of that sort than Keir Starmer seemed to be?
So the honest truth is, I just don't know, because this is a guy who has spent most of the last few years as Mayor of Manchester. And though he may have done a really effective job at it, he didn't need to have a foreign policy. He hasn't said a lot about this issue, either in the run-up to him taking the job or since. So I think we'll have to say the jury's out, and we'll have to see.
Matthew Gould, former British ambassador to Israel and former deputy ambassador to Iran. Matthew Gould, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.
And he joined us in the alphawealthgroup.com answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The IRS finally caught up with Louie.
I hadn't paid my taxes in 8 years. I owed the IRS a lot of money.
Louie was in deep trouble.
We're going to take your house,